acupuncture, and my training is in radiation oncology, and that's what I do. 5 days a week at the office, and then 24/7 on call. So I incorporate. Talk a little bit about the history. We're going to get a little bit into the legal aspects. Then we're going to get into the science and indications, titrations, and routes of administration, all sorts of good stuff. All right, so we do know, obviously, that cannabinoids have been used for thousands of years as a medicine. In the Western medicine tradition, it's been used really since 1800s. We really had nothing else. We just simply used plants. And the pharmaceutical companies like Eli Lilly and Wyeth Pharmaceuticals quickly realized that it was going to be an advantage for using these types of therapies, and they started selling them as tinctures, as you can see here. The U.S. federal government quickly also realized that there was some money to be made off of this type of medicine, and so they passed in 1937 the Cannabis Marijuana Tax Act. So this was actually, these are some of the stamps for the Tax Act. They were $1 per ounce for medical use and $100 per ounce for recreational use. So very expensive taxation. The state of Washington has also realized that there is some good taxation monies available for a number of different programs. Is what they're using the cannabis tax revenues for. The estimated tax revenue collection for just this year alone will be around $730 million. Most of that is going into Medicaid, some going into the general state fund, and then some other funds beyond that. So a lot of this is going into healthcare. If we take a look at the Boggs Act, which was passed in 1951, this is when cannabis was included with the same category of medicinals as narcotics. And then finally, in 1970, the Controlled Substances Act has classified cannabis along with the other drugs such as heroin, LSD, and mescaline into the Schedule I category, where the definition basically is that the Schedule I drugs and substances or chemicals are defined as drugs with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. And that's where we stand at this point in time, as we all know. All cannabinoid extracts are Schedule I, as long as they're coming from marijuana. However, we are now in a very sort of confusing world of hemp versus marijuana, and that's due to the Farm Bill, which basically essentially said now that we can extract out from cannabis the specific type of cannabis, hemp, which we all know, as a plant that is supposed to have less than 0.3% of the compound as THC. So that's the definition, of course, that we all know of. And if we were to do a sole extraction from that plant, we actually still cannot technically sell it based on the U.S. government law because that's an extract, and as the government still says, all except for pharmaceutically passed, approved U.S. FDA CBD, for example, when we think of Epidiolex, which is a drug we'll be talking about in a little bit, that is currently the only acceptable form of CBD that the U.S. government permits, even though clearly we can buy CBD everywhere, including Walmart these days. So it is a confusing world that we kind of live in. Hopefully that will be clarified soon. The United States government has further thrown into the confusion by patenting pretty much every known medical use for the cannabinoids by basically having this patent that they got placed in October of 2003, which essentially says they have the exclusive rights on the use for cannabinoids for treating neurologic diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and stroke, as well as diseases caused by oxidative stress, such as heart disease, Crohn's disease, diabetes, arthritis, and by the way, cancer. So essentially everything. So the U.S. government, is kind of a little bit confused, obviously, on whether or not this is useful and has medical use or doesn't have a medical use. So anyway, that's where we stand today. The Washington State recreational law basically says that anybody over the age of 21 can legally possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis, and there is a number of other little stipulations depending on the extractions and different amounts that one can have under the recreational laws. If you were to purchase more or possess more than those stated limits, then you're basically breaking the law, and there's a RCW that gives us information on what laws you're breaking. Additionally, the recreational laws tell us the DUI limits for cannabis right now. You have to have your blood drawn. It is basically a mandatory blood draw. You go to the emergency room whether you want to or not, and the ER team will get your blood. If you have a level of THC that's greater than 5 nanograms per ml of blood, you exceed the DUI limit. So obviously there's better technologies that are hoping to come out in the market to get a better idea of what truly is DUI. It's very, very, very challenging, as we all know. In terms of, as I mentioned, the DUI limits, it's 5 nanograms per ml, which is all the way at the bottom. There's a green dotted line down over here. And what you're seeing with the red spike on this curve here, this is what happens after somebody inhales either smoked or vaporized cannabis. You can see how quickly this is in hours over time here. This is the 1 hour time frame here. So essentially, almost right away, you're going to be way exceeding the 5 nanogram limit. And then finally, after about 2 hours, you'll finally get back into a range where you won't be in the DUI zone. In terms of edibles, so edibles have a different curve. Their curve is this little tiny blue line down over here. And so it takes about 2 hours to reach the DUI limit there, and then up to about 5 hours until you finally come back down. Now these are averages based on lots of different individuals, so you can't bank on this for you. Not to mention the fact that DUI is not the same thing as the WI, driving while intoxicated, and that's really a perception of the officer. So that's different. And regardless, anybody who's intoxicated, is potentially breaking the law and needs to recognize that before they're using cannabis and getting behind the wheel. This slide just simply explains sort of more of the if you're using cannabis, you get behind the wheel, if you get pulled over, the officer thinks that you've been using cannabis, and you say, well, I'm not going to the ER to get tested. Well, you'll get a telephonic warrant within about 5 minutes that will bring you to the ER and you will get tested. So just keep that in mind. Don't get behind the wheel and use cannabis. Washington State medical program is different. Okay, so for this program, there is more cannabis products that you can buy in terms of the quantity. There's more that you can have at home. Additionally, you can grow cannabis. That's what this is indicating. If you don't have the medical marijuana authorization, then you can't grow. It's illegal to grow, so you need to get that. Additionally, and this is important for a lot of patients, is that there is an 8% sales tax savings that you get if you're part of the medical program. Everybody still has to pay the built-in excise tax of around 37%, but the 8% sales tax you save for the medical program. This is what the medical marijuana authorization looks like in terms of the form. So when patients come into the office, the provider, and there's a number of different providers that can do this for you. Over here, again, very difficult to see, I'll just tell you, an MD, medical doctor, a physician assistant, osteopathic physician, which is a DO assistant, naturopathic physician, or an advanced registered nurse practitioner can all complete these forms for you if you're interested. They have to print it off on a special type of paper in the office. You need to be present with your ID. If you want to designate somebody else to come pick it up, the products for you, or grow the plants for you, you can do so. They also need to be present at that appointment in the office and show their ID, and then the provider will then sign the form, and that gives you the access then to bring this form to the dispensary, and they will process it out of the dispensary and give you a card. There are some carve-outs in the law as they pertain to beauty aids. So you can use creams, for example. There's a number of products I saw when I was going through the hall back there. creams and lotions and whatnot, and these are not actually part of the concern for some of the regulations that are in the Farm Bill. It's called the CHABA, which is the Cannabis Health and Beauty Aids. And so for topical administration, as long as the products all contain less than 0.3% THC, they're able to be used topically. Importantly, we're seeing this going on across the United States, and that is the curves for the black market sales going down dramatically from 34 billion per year in cannabis sales in 2016 to a projected 10 billion per year in 2021, while legal sales are going up, compensating for that. So anytime we can get rid of the black market and all the intended other potential criminal activities that go on, but that's not a bad idea. Importantly, if we also look at the concerns of our children getting more high now, are they using cannabis? More so now that we have these programs in place. And the answer is, it does not appear so based on the data. So if we take a look at some of these studies that have been published, looking at Colorado and looking at the state of Washington, we're actually seeing a decrease in the amount of individuals who are smoking or using cannabis. So we're seeing in 8th graders from 10% down to 7% after legalization, and 10th graders from 20% down to 18%. So that may not seem like much, and there may be some statistical issues with that, but nonetheless, we're not seeing it going up. And that was really the most important thing, because that's really the big concern that a lot of people have in the communities with these dispensaries being in their quote neighborhoods and the other issue is, is cannabis deadly? Well, most of us, I think, know that you would need to use a lot of cannabis before you would potentially die. In fact, there's not a reported incident in a respected medical journal that shows that somebody's actually died directly from the toxic exposure from cannabis. The amount that somebody would need to smoke per day would be in the order of 238 to 1,100 joints per day to get to a toxic level. Now that doesn't mean you're not going to get high, of course, but that's a very different thing from getting high to dying. And this graph that we're seeing here, this table, is one where it basically is explaining the relative toxicity of other compounds, such as at the top, alcohol. And as we go down, is heroin, cocaine, tobacco, ecstasy, methamphetamine, and cannabis. And how this graph works is that the more of a particular compound that you would need to use in order to go from being high or drunk or stoned, whatever, to dead is part of the relative toxicity. So alcohol, by the time you feel buzzed, and if you were to keep drinking after that until the time you die, it's actually the most deadly as compared to, as we start going down the list, to cannabis. Cannabis absolutely can be addictive. About 10% of people meet the classic definition for addiction with cannabis, and that's really based on withdrawal symptoms after stopping. Also, there's risks of low birth weight when a pregnant mom is using this during her pregnancy. Cognitive impairment is also something to be concerned about, particularly with the developing child brain. Memory impairment is usually something that is classical for people who are using cannabis for long periods of time, we're talking years. Although this data is controversial because there's actually a fair amount of literature that's coming out saying that with abstinence, you're able to, very, very short time, within only days, have memory recovery. So that short-term memory is actually improved very, very quickly. More research is needed on obviously all of those things. Alcohol and cannabis do act synergistically in terms of the high. They are both metabolized by similar enzymes in the liver, and so if you're using one and then using the other, you expect that the high or the buzz is going to be greater and longer. And the other issue is motor vehicle accidents are obviously, there's issues of concern for DUI. Well, it's not in a vacuum. If you're using any substance that potentially alters your mental status, there's a potential increased risk for motor vehicle accidents. So this meta-analysis simply indicated that there's about 20 to 30% higher odds of a motor vehicle crash in active cannabis users. There are 5 main reasons that people show up in the emergency room having used cannabis. This is in no particular order, okay, so we're just going to go through these. Childhood ingestion, where the child gets into their parents' stash. That, of course, is concerning for the parents. The child can get very stoned, depending on how they've consumed it. The other is acute intoxication. Particularly people who are not used to using cannabis, and especially the edible products, can get extra high, more than they even thought they would, and that can cause them to freak out and call 911, and or they're in the emergency room and they didn't really have to. They could just kind of relax and allow them, and things would have probably settled down. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is also now, it's pretty well known. It's a reaction that occurs infrequently, but it can happen in people, particularly people who use cannabis chronically. And this is a reaction where you start getting nauseated and having vomiting and abdominal pains when you use cannabis. And it can happen really out of nowhere. You're using it for months and years, and just out of nowhere it starts to become a problem for you. And how you fix it is abstinence. Synthetic cannabinoids, these are not cannabinoids, okay? So these are compounds that a lot of the kids and teenagers are using, things like K2 and spice, because they don't have access to cannabis as easily, so they're buying these things on the internet and other places, and these are very dangerous. They can be toxic to your liver, toxic to your kidneys, and people can die from these. And then this is not a common problem, but people who are actually making their own medicines at home, extracting from cannabis using volatile compounds, these volatile compounds can explode if you light them on fire. There are no increased risks, at least reported in the literature, for coronary vascular disease problems, and particularly heart attack, myocardial infarction, when we take a look at large analyses. What we do know, however, is that in the first hour of cannabis use, the heart rate can go up and blood pressure can go down. So somebody who has what's called unstable angina could potentially have an exacerbation of that unstable angina. But at least based on the large study analysis, there does not seem to be an increased risk of myocardial infarction or heart attacks. With high temperature, anytime that we're using high temperatures, in particular we're talking about vapes, we are heating up the heating elements to very, very high temperatures. We're heating up the compounds that are in the extracts to very high temperatures, and you can get some formation of toxic compounds, such as formaldehyde. We're seeing other issues that are very unclear right now in the media, as all of you are aware. We're not sure what the cause is of the inhalational lung injuries. Some studies are showing acute lung inflammation for people who are just starting to use vaporized or smoked cannabis. It's very unclear at this point. We really don't know what's going on. We do not see an increased risk of COPD, okay, so chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in people who smoke cannabis. That's emphysema and bronchitis. In people who are smoking reasonable amounts, less than 20 joints per day. Also, we don't see an increased risk of lung cancer. In fact, we don't see an increased risk of any cancer. In terms of secondhand smoke, can somebody around you get high? Can they get exposed to enough of the inhaled cannabis? The answer is yes, they can. If you're in a very tightly closed environment for a quite period of time with them, for a long period of time with them, yes, they can breathe in enough cannabis smoke or vapor where they could actually get high or in fact pop positive on a urine or blood test. Very uncommonly, there are these case reports where individuals who develop fungal lung infections. The infectious disease doctors track back to the possibility that maybe they got their fungal infection through the cannabis that they smoked. And so these are epidemiologic analyses that find that people, particularly people who are immunocompromised and use cannabis, have a greater potential risk for these fungal lung infections. Every plant, including cannabis, has fungal elements in them. It's impossible to get rid of them. And this particular study just shows the 100 of these different of these different fungal elements, and any of these can grow if you're immunocompromised potentially. But this is a very low risk issue and possibly not even a true issue, but one that I just bring up anyway because you will hear about that. The certificate of analysis is a very important part of every medical program and every recreational marijuana program. This is the laboratory testing that is done on all of the products that are sold at dispensaries. You can get COAs or certificate of analysis done on your products that you grow or make at home. You can bring them to the lab and they will test them for you, and the cost is not very expensive these days for this type of testing. But it gives information about the compounds that are in the cannabis or the extract in terms of the cannabinoid breakdown, the terpenes, other compounds that are used for extraction, microbial analysis, metals, and other toxins. This is very important. You can ask for the certificate of analysis whenever you go to a dispensary if you're looking at a product and you're just kind of curious to see what that looks like. If you just simply look at labels, labels aren't always accurate, as we can imagine. This is the case even for FDA-approved pharmaceuticals that are, for example, generics. We know that that's a big problem. But if we take a look at the THC that's in edible medical products that are dispensaries, when this Journal of American Medical Association article came out, in 2015, the researchers tested a bunch of different products from various dispensaries, and what they found was the accuracy of what's said on the label in terms of THC was only 17% accurate. 17% of the time, what they said on the label was accurate. 60% of the time, it was less THC that was in the product, that was actually in the product, and 23% of the time was more. In terms of online CBD sales, this is another Journal of American Medical Association study that came out, and they found that here, 26% of the products tested actually were accurate in terms of the label. And worrisomely, is that 1 in 5 of the samples that they tested had enough THC in it that a person could pop positive on the urine drug test. You can test your products at home with some technologies. This one's called MyDX, which you can buy online. You put the cannabis in a little chamber, a little dried cannabis in the chamber. It breathes past the chamber with some air, and then it analyzes over the next few minutes the cannabinoid percentages and gives you a little readout on your phone. In terms of the science, there's a ton of science that's out there, and there's so much more we need to know, but we definitely are pre-wired for cannabinoids. Over the last 20 years, there's been an explosion of research going on in this particular area. Our bodies make cannabinoids. We call them endocannabinoids when our body makes them. And we have receptors in our body for those endocannabinoids. They're called CB1 and CB2 receptors. They're everywhere. They're all over the body, in almost every cell. So therefore, the effects of these cannabinoids are universal on every cell of the body. So the effects are broad. The two main endocannabinoids that our body makes, one's called 2-AG and the other one's called anandamide. Anandamide looks very much like THC. And so in fact, when you're smoking or using THC in any manner, it's landing in the same receptors that anandamide would land into, which is the CB1 receptor. And the 2-AG goes into the CB2 receptor. As I mentioned, there are effects that are broad, wide, all over the map in terms of the physiology of how these cannabinoids and endocannabinoids work in almost every system in the body. When we take a look at cannabis itself as a plant, there are over 400 chemical compounds that have been identified so far in the cannabis plant. The main, quote, active ingredients that we think of at this point are the cannabinoids. However, of course, there's terpenes as well, and a number of other compounds that are in there that we'll get into in a minute. In terms of these cannabinoids, there's over 100 of these cannabinoids that are in the literature so far. 2 of them we see all the time whenever you pick up any article on cannabis, and that's delta-9 THC, or I'll just use THC from here on, and CBD. The amount of these compounds are going to vary based on the plant and the strain of the plant. growing conditions. THC is typically felt as the primary psychoactive compound by many. However, the more we're learning about the different cannabinoids, we're learning about the uniqueness of how these other cannabinoids work, and all of them have psychoactive effects, as it turns out. THC, as I mentioned previously, mimics the action of our endogenous cannabinoid and anandamide, again, fitting into the CB1 receptor, with effects really across the body, pain, inflammation, memory, appetite, etc. CBD, cannabidiol itself, we used to say that it does not have psychoactive effects. That's not correct. It definitely does have psychoactive effects. It can be calming and relaxing, can help us sleep for those reasons as well. CBD actually lands on the structure of the CB1 receptor, changing the shape of the receptor binding site so that THC has a harder time landing into that receptor. It doesn't fit as well, and therefore that changes the action of THC in its effects on your body, because it's not going to have as much psychoactive effects. If we take a look at CBD and its other effects, they're broad. CBD has impacts on opioid receptors, dopamine receptors, serotonin receptors, obviously the CB1 receptor as well. So its effects are all over the place. Seizure, Epidiolex, which is the FDA-approved CBD, is used for seizures in very rare seizure disorders. It has anti-inflammatory properties, anti-anxiety, anti-nausea, pain reduction, anti-addiction, antidepressant activities. Decarboxylation is basically taking the predominant form of these cannabinoids that are in the plants, which are the acid forms, like THCA or CBDA, and basically ripping off that acid component, decarboxylating, taking off the carboxyl unit, which is the acid unit, and simply turning it into THC or CBD. Heat does this. That's how this decarboxylation process happens, is simply through heat. There are some magical properties, however, that are with the acid components. So I think we're going to see a lot more of the products coming out over time that are actually in the acid form, the non-heat, non-decarboxylated products. Routes of administration are many. Okay, we can, you can use it sublingually, rectally, vaginally, so those are all transmucosal routes of administration. Parenterally means using it through an intravenous administration is not common. Inhalationally, either smoking or vaporizing is quite common, and edibly is also quite common. And that's just simply swallowing it. So that's different than putting it underneath your tongue. The time to action also is important in terms of the effectiveness of the cannabinoids, how quickly they get into the system. So if you're going through a mucosal membrane, like underneath the tongue, for example, the cannabis is going to get in real quickly. If you're inhaling it, also real quickly. If you're swallowing it, it's going to have to be digested. When it gets digested, it basically goes through the liver after digestion. It goes up into the big portal veins, up into the liver. The liver will then process THC into a compound called 11-hydroxy-THC, which is more fat-soluble and actually can get into the brain more easily. It lingers a lot longer. It's also a lot more psychoactive. This is why people who use cannabis edibly tend to stay higher longer and get more high. It's because of this 11-hydroxy processing, which is liver metabolism. And we call it the first pass effect. Anytime you swallow something, it goes through the liver first before going into the bloodstream, and that gives you what's called that first pass effect. And this is just further explained. This is not something you're going to possibly be able to read. I can't even read it from here, but this is a chart of the cannabinoid and pharmaceutical interactions. There are many. Okay, there are hundreds, potentially thousands of interactions, and it's going to be difficult for you to know if the medicine that you're on, the pharmaceutical medicine that you're on, is going to potentially interact. You can look some of these tables up. One thing that they do suggest, if you're curious, is to go into the free medicine interaction checkers that are available on the internet. The one that I like to use in my office is very easy. It's by WebMD. And WebMD is something called the Medicine Interaction Checker, or Drug Interaction Checker, is what it's called. And what you do with that is I will ask you to put in, instead of marijuana, they don't have that, but they do have Marinol, the FDA-approved synthetic THC. So it's obviously not the same, but it's as close as we're going to get. So there's a lot of data that's out there because Marinol's been available for many, many years. So if you put in Marinol in there, then from there you can actually see what the impacts are when you put other drugs in and press check, and it'll actually show you what goes up and down and potential toxicities, etc. I did try to put in for CBD by using Epidiolex, and it's not in there, at least it wasn't in there a few weeks ago when I was checking. It will certainly get in there at some point. If you look at the package inserts also for Marinol or for Epidiolex that are required by the FDA, you can take a look and see what drugs and potential interactions there might be written in the package insert. That's mandatory for the pharmaceutical companies. So that could give you some information. Oh, here we go, sorry. Here it is, WebMD Drug Interaction Checker. We have to hold all questions to the end just for time. The terpenes are the other large component that's in the cannabis plant. In fact, the terpenes comprise the biggest component of the compounds in the plant. In this particular graphic, it's about 80% are terpenes, about 20% are the cannabinoids. The terpenes are what give the cannabis its smell, it gives it its color, and also they have pharmacological activity themselves. And these terpenes can interact with the cannabinoids in what's called the entourage effect. And so this entourage effect has been known, discussed for many years. It's just simply a synergistic or potentially antagonistic interaction between the terpenes and the cannabinoids, and the impacts on you as the person using it. There are definitions that you're going to see thrown around, and they get somewhat confusing. Full spectrum, broad spectrum, isolates, this is the general sort of rule. Full spectrum means everything has been extracted out of the cannabis plant and is in the extract in front of you. Okay, whether it be an oil or a tincture that's a liquid tincture. Broad spectrum means that they've taken out everything, but then they've removed one or two components. Okay, so that's broad spectrum. That's different than full spectrum. And then finally, the isolates. Isolates mean we're just taking out one chemical compound only. That's for definitions for you, and that goes for all the cannabinoid products. You'll see those different definitions thrown around, and they aren't always accurate in terms of how the producer, the manufacturer is marketing the product. So, in my recommendation, if you have a choice to use these types of products, I would stick with full spectrum products. I already mentioned the two different species, but in the cannabis plant group, there was hemp and then there's marijuana. And we used to think of marijuana as sort of in two main categories, sativa and indica, where sativa had higher concentrations of THC than indicas did. And now that is no longer a very relevant terminology because you can find indicas that have higher THCs than some sativas and vice versa. So what you really want to do, instead of looking at is this a sativa or indica, look at the labeling on the package, to look at the percentages of THC versus CBD, and then to further confirm, if you're interested, look at the certificate of analysis. And again, hemp, basically federally legal, and the amount of THC in there is 0.3% or lower. And the amount of CBD in most hemp products is actually very low, which is why they have to extract out quite a bit in order to get a product that has a higher amount of CBD in it. Otherwise, they're adding isolates of CBD into the product, which does get rid of the natural state of that product. These are the sort of some of the more common cannabinoid concentrates, oils, distillates, and tinctures. There's wax, there's butter, there's others. There's a lot of products that are out there. Vaporizing and smoking, I've already kind of gone through the onset of action. It's quick. It's really within minutes. Probably within 30 seconds to 2 minutes if you're vaporizing or smoking. the medicinal effect should start to kick in. It lasts for somewhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours. It's one of the more simple ways to titrate the medicine because of the short time frame in terms of onset of action. And if you don't like the effects, you're not getting sufficient effects, you can redose pretty quickly and to achieve the effects that are desired. Sublingual products also are very similar to the onset of action and the pharmacokinetics in terms of the time that the products are sticking around your body as inhaled. Edibles take longer, as I mentioned, because you have to digest them. They are not as easy to titrate, meaning to control the impact on you. You have to really kind of figure it out a bit more. It's a little bit more of a challenge. Absolutely not difficult for somebody to do if they have a mindset on using something that is a longer acting product. Okay? Because again, you have that first pass effect through the liver, and you have more of the 11-hydroxy THC, and therefore the product is going to last longer, about 4 to 10 hours. Topicals come in patches. Patches they can apply onto your skin, work very similarly to that, like fentanyl patches. This also works in a similar manner. So it's the formulation that allows the transdermal application for the cannabinoids to actually go through the skin and into your blood system. That's very different than a lot of the topicals that you'll see on the shelves, for example, creams and lotions. Unless there's a break in the skin, those are not going to get into your blood. They're going to basically just sit on the surface of your skin, and they'll have effects very locally. Suppositories are another way for a transmucosal membrane absorption. This can be a good way for somebody who's nauseated, who wants to place the product in their rectum. The absorption really depends on how high up in the rectum the suppository is placed. A lot of people are placing the suppositories low in the rectum, probably more in the anus, and there's not a great blood flow in that area, so you're not going to get great absorption there. However, if it's placed up a bit higher to the tip of the finger, there's better blood flow in the lower portion of the rectum rather than in the anus. Vaporizers come in all different types of designs. They're all very similar, though, in their concept. Essentially, you're putting dried cannabis, or you're putting wax or some type of extract into a chamber, an oven, and you press a button on the device, and it heats up that chamber, vaporizing the product into a mixture of oils that are essentially inhaled. The combustion temperature for smoking is a lot higher than the vaporization point for vaporizers. So in order to vaporize the cannabis, you're talking around 300 degrees. To combust when you're smoking, you're talking around 400 plus degrees, and often up to in a couple of thousand degrees. So very different. And what happens to the compounds that you breathe in that are in very high temperatures is that you end up with things that can be irritants to the lung, and the lower temperatures tend not to be. In the future, we'll be able to select out the cannabinoids that you want to inhale through the temperature of the vaporizer. Some of the vaporizers now actually can set the temperature, like this one here is a German vaporizer, so it's in Celsius. But essentially, you set the temperature, and based on that temperature, everything below that temperature, you'll end up with the cannabinoids and the terpenes that have vaporization points that will come off into the vapor, which is pretty interesting. So more research obviously has to be done in that world to see how those effects will play out for any individual for any particular condition they're trying to treat. You can see the complexity of the use of cannabinoids through these different routes. Which gets us to the most common question that I get from patients, which is, how much should I use? And the answer is, I don't know, and nobody can tell you that. Nobody knows the answer to that. We are all totally different, and the products sitting in front of you are very different. In fact, batch to batch, they may still be very different. So you may go in one time to the dispensary, purchase one product, and then you go back the next time, and there could be batch to batch differences. And therefore, there could be differences not just in the concentrations of the different cannabinoids, but also the terpenes, and so it does make things a little bit more challenging. What I usually say when somebody asks me, how do you titrate? Okay, I get it, you can't tell me exactly how much to use, doc, but what's the suggestion in terms of how does one titrate? And my suggestion is based on how a pharmaceutical company called GW Pharma, which is a UK pharmaceutical company, has recommended titration for their approved Sativex product, which is a 1-to-1 CBD-THC full-spectrum extract, which is a plant, that's a marijuana plant that's grown in a factory, and generation after generation of that growth of that plant, it produces the exact same CBD-THC ratio of 1-to-1, and the terpenes and everything seems stable generation to generation in that particular plant. So then they extract out and make a pharma product that they sell as Sativex or Sativex. So how they recommend the titration is pretty much how I would. Their product is a tincture. It is a tincture that's an oral mucosal spray. It comes in a little spray bottle, looks like one of those old school Banaka bottles. And essentially, you would spray that. In this particular case, I recommend starting with sublingual. It's one of the more common ways I recommend for patients due to the ease of titration. And put a few drops, because you're going to be buying it in a different manner. You're going to end up buying it in a tincture, which is in a little bottle with a little dropper. And basically maybe use a quarter of a dropper full or up to a half of a dropper full, put it underneath your tongue, lay the tongue down on there for about 60 seconds, and then swallow whatever's left over that hasn't absorbed. And then wait a couple hours to see how the effects are. If you're too high after that point, don't redose that day. Wait 24 hours for that completely to clear out. And then I would take half of that amount the next day and then see how that works. You need to wait at least 2 hours just to make sure that you know what the full effects are. Because it takes around 5 minutes to 30 minutes for most people to feel the effects sublingually, and then up to 2 hours. So definitely you would want to redose within 2 hours. If you feel just slightly relaxed, that's sort of the dose level that I typically recommend to my patients, like as if they had had a glass of wine, something of that nature. If they're feeling absolutely nothing, then we'd have them wait the full 2 hours, and then I'd have them dose again with another dose level that's a little bit higher. So if they did a quarter of a dropper full on the first go around, maybe try half a dropper full after that and see how they feel. Once they get to that dose level that makes them feel just that little relaxed, that's the dose level that they can use pretty much every 2 hours if they want to use the cannabis on an as-needed basis in that route of administration. And of course, I explain this titration process for various routes of administration with different products. As the Sativex product was very well tolerated in most patients with, again, 1-to-1 CBD-THC ratio, my suggestion would be, maybe start with a 1-to-1 product and see how that works for you. If you get down to a really tiny amount of product being used and you're still feeling high, okay, yeah, that's probably still too much THC for you, and I would be backing down to a much more rich CBD product than THC. Lower doses may actually be better. There is an effect that happens when we start using too much cannabis all at one time. It may turn out that the benefits that we're hoping to achieve will actually diminish. So this is the Sativex product for opioid-treated cancer patients who have poorly treated cancer pain. And what they did was they gave them the ability to either spray 4 sprays, 10 sprays, or 16 sprays in order to try to see a reduction in pain. And what they found was 4 sprays actually had the greatest pain relief, and as they went up, the pain actually got worse. And similarly, if we take a look at Marinol, again, the FDA-approved synthetic extract THC, versus placebo for stress, psychosocial stress, what they found was actually that the lower doses of the Marinol actually made people have a better stress response, relaxation response rather than the higher dose. So again, there's this sort of biphasic response that happens, for higher doses might not be better. And then this comes to the question of CBD-THC ratios, and I already just sort of mentioned my thought process on that. Some people will just start with very high CBD concentration, tiny THC, like the products that are sold, for example, in the room next door over here. And that's a totally reasonable way to start as well. One can do that and see if that works for you. Because if that works for you, wonderful. You know, why get extra THC if you don't need it? So that is also a very, very legitimate thought process. The pharma products, dronabinol, nabilone, and Bixamol or Sativex, these are all FDA approved somewhere. So Marinol and nabilone are FDA approved in the United States. Sativex is UK and Canada and other countries. And then there's the latest on the market, which is the USDA or US FDA approved Epidiolex, which is just cannabidiol, again coming from full plant extract, just like their Sativex product. And this is specifically approved for these very, very rare seizure disorders called Gastaut syndrome or Dravet syndrome. Very rare, very difficult conditions to treat in terms of the fact that the standard anti-seizure medications do not work very well for these individuals. And if you were to ask a patient what do they prefer, Marinol versus natural cannabis, the things that are going to be evident are, number one, Marinol takes a longer time to kick in. So it takes about an hour again to maybe even 2 hours to reach its systemic effects because it's being digested. Cannabis, because many of the routes of administration, except for edible, are going to reach the system a lot quicker. You're going to get the onset of action more quickly. Again, titration is a more challenging thing for any edible. Absolutely not impossible, but a little more challenging than inhaled, sublingual, or other transmucosal route of administration. So Marinol would be more difficult in that matter. People getting higher with Marinol than they would be with using cannabis. And we don't have that moderating effect from the CBD either of Marinol because it's just pure THC. Marinol is Schedule 3, which means I can prescribe it. Your insurance company will pay for it, where your insurance company will not pay for the cannabis that you purchase or grow. And we have also all of the synergies of other compounds, the other cannabinoids and terpenes that we mentioned when we were talking about the entourage effects, which are in the cannabis products and are not in Marinol is also quite expensive. So if it's not fully paid for by the insurance, we're talking in your $2,000 for 30 capsules. And if somebody has nausea, you're dosing them every 46 hours. So you can see how quickly the price runs up on that. Whereas, a vape cartridge of a 1-to-1 CBD THC full spectrum extract is about $50 for a 500 milligram cartridge, which might last somebody a week or potentially two. In terms of preference, I've already sort of touched on this. Patients really do prefer products that work better, and they really don't like to use things that are going to make them too high if we're using this for patients. And so the baked goods and the edibles still are on the lower end of the scale. Most of my patients are using tinctures, they're vaporizing, they're using things that are not getting them very high. There are absolutely patients that are coming in who of course, we'll see things like RSO or Simpson oil, and that's a very, very large quantity of THC. And for novices, that can knock them, straight on the couch for quite a while. It's pretty hardcore. In terms of reiterating, sort of the dead horse here, the effects of cannabis are complicated. You have genetic variations. The plant has genetic variations. You have personalities. I'm not going to say the plant has personalities. But your mood will vary from every time that you're going to be using the medicine. You have other medical conditions possibly that can interact and also potentially either synergize or antagonize, including the medicines that you use for those conditions with the cannabis medicine. The concentrations of the cannabinoids also vary product to product and are going to be different interactions for you versus somebody else. And the routes of administration are also varying in terms of their effects on you versus somebody else. So lots of things we don't know, and pretty much everything that as it comes into play on the unknowns are things that are going to come into play as we go further here into the uses. There are some interesting apps that have come out. One of them is called Relief. Relief app is a crowdsourced sort of rating system where people can go in and put their cannabis that they just purchased at the store, and they can actually plug in the information of that cannabis into the app, and they can see how other people have interacted in terms of how they felt when they used it for their various conditions. And you can help further add to the information on that. It's kind of like those traffic apps like Waze, for example. This is something that's really taking, I think, the cannabinoid industry to the sort of the next level, and that's water-soluble cannabinoids. So cannabinoids are fat-soluble. They're generally in oils or alcohols, and now you're starting to see them being able to be absorbed into water using what's called nano-encapsulation, with nanobubbles of water. Different companies are jumping into this. This is something that's been difficult for many years to be able to do. The technology has gotten a lot better. Why does this matter? Because now you can put the cannabinoids into things like Coca-Cola and other products. You can put it into tinctures. They're going to absorb way more quickly, within seconds. You don't have to wait around for a long period of time for digestion, for example. You also have a much higher bioavailability, which means you don't need as much CBD, for example. The concentration does not need to be as high in the product in order for you to get the effect, because the absorption is markedly higher. The other thing that's kind of starting to creep onto the scene, and that is metered dispensing. So physicians care a lot about this, because we think about this every day in our practice. You know, how many pills do we tell you to take per hour or per day of a particular pharma product? Well, this is in line with our way of thinking. So we like this type of way of thinking, which is, take, 5 milligrams of, whatever the product is and redose every 2 hours. And this allows you also to titrate more carefully. So right now, you're just sort of inhaling through a vaporizer kind of willy-nilly, or you're putting drops under your tongue kind of willy-nilly, or you're using a syringe of oil and you're just kind of squirting out by hand. There's no precise amount that you can actually measure in terms of the dollop of oil on your finger. So metered dispensing is definitely going to revolutionize the cannabis world, I think. I mentioned the acid component of THC, so THCA is also, of course, CBDA and other cannabinoids. This is just the non-decarboxylated form, the predominant form in the plant. It turns out, well, this is the most common of the cannabinoids, would be THCA. This is marijuana. And there is no receptor binding to CB1 and CB2. What we believe is happening is that the THCA stimulates the 5-HT receptors, which is the serotonin receptors. We also have inhibition of the COX-1 and COX-2 enzymes, which are inflammation enzymes, and we have effects also on nausea. So anti-inflammatory, anti-pain, anti-nausea. How am I doing for time? Am I running into yours?
Oh, you're doing great. Okay. You got an hour left.
Oh, wow. Man. So, let's see. Oh, this is just one particular product. That's the point of all this. Okay, the next is the indications. Let's go into some of the indications that our state says that we can write for medical marijuana authorizations for. It's a long list. And so basically cancer, HIV/AIDS, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy or other seizure disorders, spasticity disorders, intractable pain, glaucoma, Crohn's disease, hepatitis C, PTSD, TBI, meaning traumatic brain injury, any chronic or debilitating disease. Well, that's good. Right? And then chronic renal failure requiring dialysis. So these indications are all on the medical marijuana form, and we just check them off. As long as you meet those criteria, we feel you're a good candidate for it. We consent you based on routes of administration, potential contraindications. We're going to look at other medicines you're on, and an assortment of other things before we just simply sign off on the form. So if we take a look at what the National Cancer Institute data shows, we can also take a look at what the National Academy of Sciences has to say. These are some really great references that are free to you. And the National Academy of Sciences is comprised of a panel of experts, as is the National Cancer Institute panel that puts together their cannabis and cannabinoids for cancer patients PDF. And both of these are really, really useful. But I'm just going to break down the indications just into the main things here. Let's go through glaucoma. So the American Academy of Ophthalmology says in their consensus statement about cannabis, they say there are no scientific evidence demonstrating increased benefit compared with the wide variety of pharmaceutical agents now available. I highlighted the word compared because that's really an important point, is that they're not saying that cannabinoids don't work. They're just saying that compared to the other pharmaceuticals that are out there, we don't have evidence that cannabinoids work better than them. You have to carefully read the lines. If you take a look here, it says the National Eye Institute sponsored studies, in fact, demonstrate that marijuana does lower intraocular pressure. There it is, right there. However, when used orally, IV, or by smoking, but they want to make sure you don't drip it on your eye. That's not the way they want you to use it. Don't drip it on your eye. And the duration of effect is in the range of 3 to 4 hours. Okay, so the issue with that comes down to, is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 1? Is it 10? How many hours is it? How are you going to know? You can't know unless you have your own intraocular pressure sensor in your office, you get at home. So that's a challenge. Plus, if you go to bed at night, you're going to set your alarm to wake up and put more drops, not in your eye, underneath your tongue. Okay, so a lot of questions regarding that, but absolutely, it does lower intraocular pressure. If we take a look at the American Academy of Neurology and their consensus statement, we'll go through some of the indications. So for MS-related spasticity, there's strong evidence that the cannabinoids work for that condition. If we take a look at central pain in MS, also strong evidence. Bladder problems, moderate evidence. And then as we get into tremor, moderate evidence. As we look at Parkinson's, uncontrolled movements, moderate evidence. And then Huntington's disorder, it's unknown. Tourette's, unknown. Cervical dystonia, which is a movement disorder of the neck, also unknown. And then seizures as well. Seizure disorders, also unknown. Although we do have that study that basically came out that showed that using CBD actually does significantly help these children with these very rare seizure disorders, as I mentioned, which is why the FDA finally did approve the Epidiolex product. Now, Alzheimer's disease is obviously a huge, just terrible problem. About a third of us in this room are going to develop dementia of any type at some point during our lifetime, and Alzheimer's just being one of them. There's a lot of research looking into ways in which we can try to prevent Alzheimer's as well as manage it, and this gets into a little bit of the science of potentially cannabinoids for it. So looking at the basically cell studies, they find that placing THC in the vicinity of neuronal cells actually significantly decreases the amount of inflammation that's in that environment and leading to decreased deposition of these amyloid proteins, which are considered at least very important in the process of developing Alzheimer's, because those plaques develop and basically interact with our neurons, leading to dysfunction of the neurons. This is an actual clinical study. So now we're getting into something that's potentially more useful here. So looking at nabilone, which is a synthetic THC, okay, so FDA-approved synthetic THC, they took 39 patients and they did a 14-week study. These 39 patients with Alzheimer's received nabilone capsules for 6 weeks. And then they crossed them over into a placebo after a 1-week break. So 6 weeks on THC, 1 week break, and then another 6 weeks of now placebo. And then they took the other component of the patients and crossed them over just in the exact opposite realm. And what they found was that there was a significant reduction in agitation in those who were, while they were taking the nabilone, 47%, compared to those who were on the placebo, 23%. And nabilone improved overall behavioral symptoms in those with Alzheimer's. And really, really importantly, and often not talked about and forgotten, are the caregivers. And what they found was there was a decrease in caregiver distress when their loved one was on a nabilone. So that's a really important point, I think, to make about this. We don't really talk about that as much. Nausea and vomiting, if we take a look at the meta-analysis data, it turns out that chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, we all know that that's a pretty terrible problem, and chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting is pretty common. The use of nausea medicines can be very, very helpful for these individuals who have this problem. We prescribe them preventatively. We give patients as needed nausea medicines. When patients are, when we look at studies of THC, specifically Marinol, versus placebo, we find that the Marinol is 50% better than the placebo. It's around 33% better than the older anti-nausea medicines like Compazine and Phenergan. And just in general, patients prefer to use the Marinol over the older medications. Patients like things that work better. And if we ask the National Academy of Sciences what their opinion is on this, they agree. They say that there is conclusive evidence that cannabinoids or cannabis can be effective for this condition. Cancer cachexia is a terrible problem. This is where, I think towards the end of life, a number of cancer patients will have what's called really just a huge inflammatory reaction that happens in their body. We don't completely understand how this process is, the physiology of this, but what happens is the muscle breaks down, the fat gets burned off, and essentially you lose so much weight that your body essentially shuts down. That's called cachexia. So anything that we could possibly do to try to help alleviate that problem would be something that needs to be looked at. Looking at Marinol by itself, a pretty low dose, 2.5 milligram Marinol, given twice a day, increased appetite, food tasted better, and patients ate more protein in comparison to placebo. And if we look at and compare Marinol versus a commonly prescribed steroid medication called Megace, it turns out that the Megace does work better. It increased appetite by 75% versus in this study, Marinol increased appetite by about 50%. Both groups did gain weight, but the Megace group gained 11%, and the THC group only 3%. If you add both together, unfortunately, there was no synergy between the two. One thing to note here is Megace is associated with a lot of symptoms. Patients really don't like feeling jittery, a little bit anxious. People have difficulties with sleeping. So you're trading one medicine for a lot of side effects in that case. The National Academy of Sciences says that there is not enough evidence to support the use of cannabis or cannabinoids, however, for this indication. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work. And I often still recommend it for patients to try. Because clinical trials are only as good as the design of the study and how many people are in it and the product that's used and routes of administration. So there's a lot of potential limitations. So it's certainly worth a try. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. In terms of pain management, I'm going to talk to you a little bit of how I recommend the use of cannabinoids for pain management. So there's two definitions, two distinct types of pain that I want to talk about. One is chronic, and the other is acute breakthrough pain. So chronic pain is by definition pain that lasts for at least 12 hours consistently throughout the day. And many of my patients as an oncologist suffer from chronic pain. And many patients in general, chronic back pains and other things, suffer from chronic pain. And then there's this other pain that's called breakthrough pain. Okay, breakthrough pain is defined as pain that pops up above and beyond that chronic pain threshold level that you normally have. So if you're walking around with a pain level of, say, 5 out of 10, and that's your chronic pain level, and then just you're sitting there on the sofa watching TV, or you're out at the mall shopping, and out of nowhere you get this spike in pain that's just incapacitating, and you now can't move, you're stuck. That pain happens very often in cancer patients and often in other conditions as well. On average in oncology patients, it happens about 7 times a day, and the episodes are not long, although they can feel like an eternity to the individual, but they last for about 15 to 60 minutes long, And the time from when you don't feel it to the time where it's at peak intensity is somewhere around 1 to 10 minutes. So it comes on quickly. And it fortunately will resolve spontaneously back to your chronic pain level within 15 to 60 minutes. So being able to manage those two types of pain is something that's very important in pain management in general. Now, if you're trying to use cannabinoids as your method of controlling pain, what you would want to probably consider is using a long-acting form of a cannabinoid, like an edible administration, for your chronic pain. So figuring out what would take you from that 5 out of 10 down to maybe a 2 out of 10, something that's more bearable, and that you can live with. And then when you have those breakthrough episodes, you have your emergency medicine, so to speak, in your purse, ready to go, in your pocket, whether that be a tincture or whether that be a vapor spray of some sort, vaporizer. Those are different ways in which you can now use the two different routes of administration to kick in with different time points. So you can be on your long-acting edible medicine, and you can still take your shorter acting, faster onset action sublingual tincture, to kick in within about 5 minutes to 15 minutes, which is about what you need because these episodes last for around 15 to 60 minutes. So you wouldn't want to wait for them to be lingering for a while. You would want to probably manage it right away so you can try to hit that episode right away. Neuropathic pain is another type of pain. This is a nerve pain in itself. This is not due to damage per se in the tissues, but this is due to damage of the nerve itself. And HIV-related neuropathic pain is unfortunately a common problem. Using smoked cannabis, there is a 72% reduction in neuropathic pain versus a placebo cannabis where the THC itself has been removed. Only about 15% reduction in neuropathic pain. If we take a look at, this is in neuropathic pain for cancer patients. This is an important study, again, using the Sativex product. So now here we're actually in the population where we can potentially use the 1-to-1 ratio products that are available. So here we found that 30% reduction, neuropathic pain was reduced by 30% in patients using a 1-to-1 ratio in the majority of those patients. So that's really pretty decent. 30% reduction in pain in the majority of the patients. So that's not nothing, that's something. And it's not a narcotic, so that's good. The anti-seizure medicines, or the medicines like gabapentin and Neurontin, which are commonly prescribed by pain doctors and oncologists for neuropathic pain, have a lot of side effects associated with them. They can be helpful, but they do have a lot of potential side effects for this particular condition. So it might be worth giving a try to these medicines. And in fact, you can even apply the CBD-rich or 1-to-1 ratio or even high THC products on your skin over the areas of neuropathic pain. And I have a lot of patients that get a lot of relief using it that manner. In terms of, this is a crossover study that just further looks at the data, looking at vaporized cannabis. They found that even low-dose vaporized cannabis can be very helpful. So this was 2.5 to 3.5% superior to placebo for neuropathic pain control. In terms of can we use cannabis along with opioids, the answer is absolutely we can. And it's part of the consenting process where we go through the discussion of, well, what can happen? If you use the two together, somebody can get more sedated that way. And so there are risks. But the risks, I say, with the opioids are even more of a concern. As we know in our population with the opioid addiction problem, anything that we can do to reduce the amount of opioids that somebody needs to take to help them with their pain, we ought to be trying to do that. And so by adding cannabis to the mix, we're able to, based on studies, and there's one study right here from UC San Francisco, we're able to significantly reduce potentially the amount of opioids somebody would need to use. This was a study, it was actually one of the fastest accruing studies in the history of UC San Francisco. one of my good friends, Dr. Donald Abrams, and colleagues, he's an integrative oncologist at UC San Francisco. They basically used a vaporizer called the Volcano, and they used cannabis, and they recruited people around San Francisco who were chronically using opioids. And essentially they said, hey, show up for, to the Mount Sinai campus, and we'll enroll you into this trial if you meet criteria. It was, let's say, one of the fastest enrolling trials at UC San Francisco. You can imagine getting free cannabis vaporized to help science. And what they found was that cannabis did act synergistically with opioids, and it suggested that really based on the study that they had, that there was about a 30% enhancement of the effect of the pain relief when you added cannabis on top of it, which suggests possibly that we can reduce the opioids by 30% by increasing the cannabis in order to get the same effect. So interesting, and lots more research that can be done in that realm. Now this is also a very important study, and I really appreciate the pharmaceutical studies because, again, they're done in as rigorous of a manner as we can ask for. And they help us with the products that we have at the dispensaries in order for me to counsel patients. So here is the Sativex product, again, and this is their 1-to-1 THC-CBD ratio. It's being used in a population of patients that I see too frequently, and that's patients who are on opioids for their cancer pain, but their pain is not well controlled, even on high levels of opioids. That's a terrible problem to have. It's called intractable pain. And so what they did was they gave these individuals the addition of the Sativex product, and what they found was that significantly reduced the pain in the majority of these people who were already on the opioids. When they gave them a THC-only product, there was absolutely no benefit over placebo. That's important. That's probably one of the most important slides that I have here in this talk, is that these isolates, so by themselves, without the synergistic effects, the entourage effects of these other cannabinoids and terpenes, we're missing out in terms of helping patients when we're using things that are isolates. So the natural products, there's a big advantage likely in that. And so we may be, with some of the studies that failed to show benefit with Marinol, the synthetic THC, those need to be revisited to see whether or not the full spectrum extracts could be better. If we take a look at what happens in populations of people who are chronically using opioids, and then they start using cannabinoids on top of it, they find that cannabis use is associated with a 64% lower opioid use in patients with chronic pain. That's awesome, right? That's anything we can do, again, to try to get people off of opioids or reduce their opioid dose. That's fantastic. Cannabis use was associated with a better quality of life in patients with chronic pain, a 45% improvement in their quality of life. And then cannabis use was associated with fewer medication side effects and fewer medications used. Well, that makes sense because it's helping with their pain. They're coming off of these other stronger medications that have more effects. And this was an important announcement in 2016 from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And this really highlights a point that I think might be missed in some pain clinics, and that is the CDC really recommends that standardly we shouldn't be testing people for cannabinoids as part of their contract when they're going in there for pain management. Because they, understandably, pain management clinics want to know what people are taking. They want to know if their medicines that they're prescribing, particularly opioids, are being taken by the individual, not being sold to other people, given away to other people. And so by testing their patients, they can figure out, do they have this opioid in them? If they don't, I've been prescribing it, they're here for refill, something's going on. Or are they using polypharmacy, other street medicines along with the opioids I'm giving them? That could be a problem. So there are, one thing that happens in pain clinics is you have to sign a contract when you go to a pain clinic. And so that contract basically says, I promise not to do X, Y, and Z, and one of them is, to combine other medicines or, drugs along with the things that we're prescribing. So this is an example where you know, in a discussion with the pain doctor, you say, I recognize that you test for THC. I'm using it. I'm under a medical authorization, or could you put me under a medical authorization? I just want to be able to continue to use that. I still need your help with these other issues, and that should be a good conversation. It should hopefully go well. In terms of the National Academy of Sciences and their thoughts on cannabis as a pain medicinal, they say that there is conclusive evidence that it's effective in that regard. In terms of sleeping problems, here's the Sativex product again, the 1:1 THC CBD tincture, markedly improves sleep parameter scores by 40 to 50%. And the National Academy of Sciences says there's moderate evidence for that benefit, for that use. Stress and anxiety, we look at Marinol. This significantly improves sleep quality and relaxation quality of life scores. If we take a look at smoked cannabis in a program in New Mexico for PTSD patients who are using cannabis, and this is really a survey study, the individuals who are in this program indicated that cannabis use reduced their PTSD scores by 75%. As a veteran myself, I can tell you how incredibly deleterious this whole PTSD problem is. It's widespread. It's not just in military and veterans, it's on law enforcement and many people just in regular society. And my cancer survivors have post-traumatic stress related symptomatology, if not the disorder itself. And so anything that we can use that's not very toxic, we ought to be trying to look into. So this would be one potential use. Here yet another study, this one using the synthetic THC, Nabalone. THC reduced PTSD nightmares by 50%. And then what about just CBD alone? So using CBD alone, cannabidiol, in a social phobia situation, like somebody standing up in front of you guys talking into the audience and maybe getting a little nervous. This was actually a study that was done. So they gave individuals who have this social phobia the option of either doing a placebo or CBD. What they found was CBD alone actually reduced anxiety in the individuals who have this social phobia. The National Academy of Sciences says, well, there's limited evidence that cannabinoids could be helpful for stress, anxiety conditions. What about in cancer? Okay, I'm an oncologist, so many of my patients ask me this all the time. I just had somebody today ask me this. If I'm using cannabis, is it going to help me with my cancer? And my answer is, nuanced. And we'll get to the punchline though in a minute. But cannabinoids have been known as having anti-cancer property for a long time, since the 70s. And the studies since then have really corroborated this, with all of the different cannabinoids, really having a lot of different anti-cancer properties in the most prestigious journals in medicine and science. The question, however, is, okay, so there's evidence of this in animals and in petri dishes, but how about in humans? And this is the big deal. So the first study to be published really was, what was this one? And it was a bust. And it was 9 patients with recurrent glioblastoma multiforme brain tumors, the most aggressive type of brain tumor. These patients had surgery, they had radiation, they got chemotherapy, and their cancers came back. And there really was nothing else at the time that this study was being conducted to help these patients. And so there were a few patients, 9 of them, that agreed to have a catheter put into the resection cavity through their skull and have THC dripped into the resection cavity to see if it might slow down the recurrence of their tumor. And what they found was some anti-cancer response on the edge of the resection cavity. But being that this is a compound that's not going to get very deeply into tissues, it couldn't get deeper into the tissues. And this tumor has tentacles that it can extend, an inch or 2 beyond the resection cavity. So there'd be no way to control this cancer with this. And all the patients died in the same time as one would expect for the general population of GBM recurrence patients. And based on that one study, the National Academy of Sciences says there's insufficient evidence to either support or refute, which is good of them to at least say that, the conclusion that cannabis or cannabinoids are effective in the treatment of cancer. Well, this study actually did get published. It says awaiting publication. It was GW Pharma's cannabis-derived drug, Sativex, again, 1:1 CBD-THC ratio, shows promise in this brain cancer study. This was the exact same population of recurrent glioblastoma multiforme patients. Instead of dripping the synthetic THC extract into the cavity, these patients actually used this product through an oral mucosal spray. So they actually got it systemically this time. They took 12 patients in the THC CBD arm and 9 patients in a placebo arm. And what they found was that the median survival was 550 days in the CBD THC arm and 369 days in the arm that got the placebo. All patients were receiving concurrent temozolomide, which is an oral chemotherapy pill that's standard during this time. So they were all getting standard therapy. The ones who lived almost 6 months longer were the ones that were on the THC CBD. Now this was a tiny study. We're talking, you've got 21 patients. That's not go the other way in terms of, the patients didn't survive as long. And we have a signal here that the researchers will hopefully take to the next step, which would be a larger randomized trial. That said, my punchline. At this point, no, I don't recommend, and nor does any, I think, oncologist recommend using cannabinoids as a treatment for cancer. Using it in cancer patients for prevention of symptoms or treatment of symptoms, absolutely. That's definitely helpful. And one thing that I like to point out on that point is that if we can treat a patient for the symptoms they're having of their cancer treatment, and we can make those symptoms more tolerable so that they can receive the prescribed cancer treatment in the dose and the intensity that we wanted them to get, wouldn't that patient more likely have a better outcome from their cancer than somebody who had to quit their cancer treatment or markedly reduce the intensity that we wanted to give? So in that regard, it should have an indirect benefit on outcomes. Okay, so that's where we want to see these studies go, is to see managing side effects, does that help ultimately improve outcomes, specifically when we're using cannabinoids? And gosh, if it even helps, in this regard, where we may see true anti-cancer benefits, boy, that would be amazing. Right now, clinical trials are going on all over the world. If we take a look at cannabis and medicine, just right now there's 114 trials going on internationally. So you can actually go on to a website, this same website called clinicaltrials.gov, and plug in cannabis or marijuana or CBD and type in your condition that you're looking for, whether or not there's a study out for that condition, and just press search, and you'll find all the studies that are available all over the world. You can search by location, you can search by studies that are open, closed, or about to open. A really great resource. And this is just my website. It's called Integrative Oncology-Essentials.com, and it's the most visited, one of the most visited websites in integrative oncology. I have a lot of information in here on this topic, as well as a number of other topics as they relate to integrative oncology. And I practice at the Northwest Cancer Clinic, so if you are a cancer patient or if you are a survivor from cancer, you can see me and we can have a consultation. It would be what's called an integrative oncology consultation, where we can go through a variety of different things relating to your cancer and your health. That's not just related to cannabis. Of course, if somebody needed radiation or any type of actual definitive cancer treatment, I can direct people in that regard, whether it be radiation in my practice or others, or surgeries in other locations or other drug therapies, etc. So thank you very much. happy to answer any questions if you guys have questions. Yes.
Earlier you were talking about if you get too high, are you aware of or have heard of people being able to take CBD to also help bring that back down? Can that be oral consumption, or is that only by smoking or vaporizing? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know about whether if you're high and you take CBD, whether that would bring down the high at that point. I'm not sure. I don't have experience with that.
Okay, so
But if you use a product, before you get high, that happens to have higher CBD in it, then that would presumably lead to the next time you're using that product, a lower high. And I'm not aware of it as a rescue medicine, kind of for the high.
okay,
Are you?
yeah, actually it works.
Okay. Well,
Vaporizing it does. It helps.
does anybody else
Actually.
share that same response? You take
Yeah.
CBD and that helps bring the high down? Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
You said something about cannabis affected the dopamine receptors. Do you know how that has with that? Does cannabis have any impact on any of the Parkinson's symptoms, or is that affected by the dopamine receptors or reception?
It does, and that's why the American Academy of Neurology says that for Parkinson's, it absolutely is. There are data, there are strong evidence data for use for the movement disorders in Parkinson's.
So is that the THC or the CBD one? Or both?
I don't know. Yes.
Is there a copy of your presentation available anywhere? And what lab do you go to for testing it? And what do you think, is that app accurate?
So this presentation, at least an older version of it, because I constantly am updating this presentation. I actually have it recorded, and we actually have somebody right here who's recording it live, I think, Facebook Live maybe?
Actually, YouTube.
Oh, YouTube.
YouTube Live.
But I do also have it on my website, but now an older version, because literally right before I do my talks, I'm putting in new slides. I don't know of the labs. You can just Google that and figure out. And what was the last question?
Do you think that app is accurate?
The Relief app?
Yes. No, the MyDX, I think
Oh,
you said?
so MindX is a technology device itself that basically is about 10% plus or minus, according to them, accurate in terms of the CBD and THC concentrations in comparison to the labs.
Okay, and the lab would be specific, it would be right?
The lab would be a lot closer.
Okay.
Yes.
I got another one. There's another. Okay, so earlier you were talking also about how the consumption of I can't remember the chemical reaction going through your liver. What's that one called?
The first pass effect we're talking
Yeah,
about.
so back to that one. So when you're vaporizing it or combusting it or not consuming it edibly, does it pass through the liver and does it create that as well?
So it doesn't go first pass, so the predominant amount of the product is going to go directly to the tissues. Ultimately, whatever is not absorbed into the tissues will then subsequently go through the liver and be processed in the liver.
Is there a large form of that though? Because it seems like when you really consume it or other ways of that way, rather than eating it, you don't get that drunk feeling like you can through a liver when it goes through the liver.
Right, so a smaller percentage of it because it can be broken down in the tissues as well, not just in the liver itself. So when you go directly to the liver, you have a much larger concentration. One of the slides shows of that first pass effect where you get that conversion into 11-hydroxy THC, which is the compound that passes more easily through the blood-brain barrier and lingers a lot longer. So that's why you're getting that.
You can get that drunk, that weird feeling.
Correct.
And that's what I've experienced is actually then vaping CBD on top of an edible, and it's actually helped calm that down and taken that away.
Thank you for
So,
sharing that.
yeah.
I will be looking that up.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. I'm asking two different
this uploaded on what YouTube?
It's called TaraLee Live.
TaraLee.
TaraLee, yep.
T-A-R-A.
Lee. Uh-huh.
Lee Live.
Yep, if you do hashtag or just type that in, you should find it.
Hi.
Thank you for doing that.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Hey guys, how's it going? I am going to set this down over here. Who's all here? I got a few people in chat. How you doing? How you doing? What's everybody doing? Hi. Hello. What's up? What's up? Okay, well, I got it recorded for you guys, so you can watch it in a little bit. I am out in the lobby. I'm charging my phone a little bit because it's about ready to go dead. Okay, so I am here at the Hemp and Health Expo, if y'all didn't already know that. And this is the classes that they're having today, and then also tomorrow. Gives you a little bit of idea what they got coming up. Don't know what all I'm going to be catching, but I'm going to try and catch most of them for you guys. So make sure that you click that bell and subscribe, or you're not going to get the notifications. Apparently there's 2 bells you got to click. I don't know, kind of crazy. So, okay, so I hope you guys like that. And if you have any questions, leave questions, because I can contact this guy afterwards and we can talk to him, or maybe I can get him on. I don't know, get him on my channel. So, okay guys, check it out. I'm gonna go live probably from the floor in a little while, and I think there's another doctor coming up that I wanted to also get, and then some also food demonstrations going on. So, okay, bye guys. I gotta get this downloaded. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you later.